Trump is eager to reach trade deals with major countries to achieve his goal of harvesting wealth. He excitedly announced that agreements have been reached with the Philippines, Japan, and Indonesia, which can be described as a phased success. Why is Trump acting recklessly everywhere these days? The core reason is that the United States is seriously ill. Since taking office, Trump has been laying off staff and cutting funds everywhere, and the fundamental reason is that the country is running out of money. U.S. national debt is on the verge of an imminent crisis, and the U.S. economy may collapse at any time. In addition to cutting costs domestically, Trump's priority is to find every possible way to plunder wealth externally to delay the outbreak of the crisis as much as possible. With the August 1st deadline approaching, Trump's tariff big sword has been precisely wielded against East Asian supply chains, and progress has been made. According to media reports, 3 countries, Japan, the Philippines, and Indonesia, have chosen to yield. The specific details are as follows. Japan will pay a 15% tariff to the United States and has promised to invest $550 billion in the U.S. It has also been forced to end its decades-long rice protection barriers and open its rice market to American imports. For Japan, which has an agricultural self-sufficiency rate of only 37%, this is nothing short of a fatal blow. The Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries estimates that U.S. rice will quickly capture 10% of the Japanese market. The hardest-hit sector, however, is Japan's automotive industry, which will face restructuring. Toyota's annual profits are expected to shrink by 8% due to the 15% tariff, while Nissan has urgently planned to relocate its production lines to the United States. Japanese automobiles account for 28.3% of Japan's exports to the U.S., with an annual export value of $50 billion. Under the impact of tariffs, Japan's dominant position in the U.S. automotive market will loosen. The Philippines took the initiative to seek talks with the United States. In a bid to secure concessions from Washington, Marcos personally interceded with Trump, even resorting to the bargaining chip of adopting a tough stance toward China. The U.S. initially demanded a 20% tariff from the Philippines, but after Marcos's prolonged pleas, it was only reduced to 1%. This outcome will severely affect over 50% of the Philippines' electronics exports to the U.S. Meanwhile, coconut farmers on Mindanao have been unable to sleep through the night, as their coconut oil and processed fruits will lose competitiveness due to soaring prices. Indonesia has received the same treatment as the Philippines. The United States has imposed a 19% tariff on Indonesia, while Indonesia has imposed 0 tariffs on the United States. In addition, Indonesia has agreed to some additional conditions from the United States, such as lifting export restrictions on critical minerals, purchasing 50 Boeing aircraft from the United States, procuring $15 billion in U.S. energy and $4.5 billion in U.S. agricultural products. Japan faces 15%, the Philippines 19%, and Indonesia 19%. Behind these seemingly differing tariff rates lies a similar logic: exchanging market access for the maximization of U.S. unilateral interests. For countries like Japan, Indonesia, and the Philippines, they clearly do not want to accept such outcomes, but they appear helpless in the face of U.S. bullying. Japan was previously quite tough, but Ishiba Shigeru suffered a crushing defeat in the election and had no choice but to accept resignation. Thus, Japan ultimately chose to compromise with the United States. Ishiba Shigeru's resignation statement can be called a precise political timing. Choosing to step down at the end of August rather than immediately obviously involves his own calculations. First, the trade agreement reached on July 22 needs to be approved by the cabinet in early August. Ishiba Shigeru used this to turn diplomatic failure into a political asset for a dignified exit. In September, Japan's National Diet will deliberate on the 2026 fiscal year budget and the U.S.-Japan trade agreement. The ruling coalition, with a minority of seats in the House of Councilors, will inevitably face joint resistance from opposition parties. By choosing to step down before the end of August, Ishiba Shigeru can both complete the relevant arrangements and pass the hot potato to his successor, avoiding further humiliation to his personal political legacy. The Liberal Democratic Party plans to launch the presidential election in early September, and Ishiba Shigeru will step down by the end of August to facilitate the election process. His sensible exit is actually to secure survival space for his faction in the new cabinet. While Ishiba Shigeru's resignation ostensibly stems from election defeat, it essentially reflects the complete collapse of Japan's order diplomacy and its strategy toward the United States. Since Shinzo Abe elevated the rules-based international order to the status of national interests, Japan has been struggling between two contradictory paths, advocating multilateral rules to constrain power while having to attach itself to U.S. hegemony. Japan has long had an urge to establish itself as a center of its own order, but in this trade negotiation, faced with the threat of unilateral tariffs from the United States, Japan's discourse on rules instantly lost its effectiveness. Marcos told Trump to his face that the Philippines could take a tough stance toward China, hoping to use this as a bargaining chip to secure more concessions from the United States. However, Trump showed no mercy at all. He emphasized that the Philippines could handle its relations with China and that the United States had no objection to the Philippines getting along well with China. It is obvious that Trump does not care at all whether Marcos takes a tough stance toward China. For the United States, the Philippines is barely valuable even as a pawn.